This is episode 298 of Mitolife Radio. I'm Matt Blackburn, and this is going to be another solo show, this time on EMFs, electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation. Seems like a lot of people are already on vacation because I'm having trouble scheduling people in to interview. So we'll just keep rolling out these solo shows because a lot of people enjoy them. I get a lot of requests that people enjoy my solo talks even more than the interviews. It's definitely more energy for me to do these, but I have a unique perspective on a lot of things and people seem to enjoy it. With this EMF topic, it's something that I have 14 years of experience with because when I became interested in human health, natural health, I also became interested in water, air, and then quickly learned about grounding or earthing, Wi-Fi, the harms of cell phone radiation, kind of all at the same time. So studying all of those things for the last 14 years. But EMFs are a fascinating topic because it's something that we don't pick up with our five senses, but our cells hear it, our mitochondria feel it. And as I'll talk about later in the show, it does have real biological harmful effects. But my focus with this show, besides focusing on solutions, is really to remove the fear from this topic. And if not fear, then just the neuroses and obsession with it. Shortly after I moved up here to Idaho from California, I went to almost like a little town hall meeting at someone's house. And it's burned into my memory that there's this woman just lecturing for what felt like hours on the harms of EMFs and how it was affecting her and all her personal stories. And I remember being so frustrated, wanting to stand up and shout because she offered no solutions. It was all fear-based and just basically trying to convince people that they're harmful without offering even one solution. And at that time, even with my limited knowledge, about 4 years ago, I still had at least 10 solutions, and she didn't name any of them. So I'm going to start from the beginning and give a quick summary of my health journey because it does segue into this topic. So back in 2005, 2006, my Aikido sensei introduced me to a documentary called Zeitgeist, and that shattered my religious beliefs, but also made me question just the nature of reality, why the world was the way it was, and getting into so-called conspiracy stuff. A channel called Project Camelot that I binged for the next 4 or 5 years. And it wasn't until 2010 that I found green vegetable juicing and raw veganism and detoxification. And that had been going on for quite a while before then. I think it actually started peaking around 2006 to 2008, if I remember correctly, looking back in the YouTube history. But all of the raw vegan educators talking about superfoods and different detox methods. And I got into it a little late, but it was still going on. And I went from being a unhealthy, like bread and cheesetarian, vegetarian for the prior 5 years or so to strict, almost 100% raw vegan. I would say I was maybe about 70% with a heavy emphasis on raw foods and juicing. So I was drinking fresh vegetable juice that I made at home at least 4 to 5 days a week. And at the same time, I was getting into Ayurvedic herbs. I was getting into water filtration, water harvesting from all over Southern California, making crazy drives to pick up different spring and well waters. And I was also playing around with EMF technology, EMF mitigation. And one of the first things that I did was get into silver embedded grounding sheets that you sleep on. So this is now what I sell through my company, Mitolife, but it's essentially a white cotton sheet with a silver grid throughout it. And you connect that conductive silver grid to a cord that is connected to a ground rod that you hammer into the earth. And even though I was living with my parents at the time and Wi-Fi was on 24/7 and it was a population dense area, so I'm sure there were multiple Wi-Fi signals, I still felt incredible grounding rod to earth. That was probably mid to late 2010, and I was moving very quickly. My family thought I was obsessive or crazy for a while because I was just going full speed ahead, researching and also implementing, more importantly, everything that I was learning and just experimenting with all sorts of different things. I was playing around with different energy discs. I went to a conference and discovered the tachyon energy discs. They're supposedly laminated quartz circles that basically harness or access faster than light particles. They're theoretical, and it shoots them out 12 to 15 feet. So I was putting those on my phone. I was putting them above the head of my bed, obviously under the Wi-Fi router, on my computer monitor. I even did a experiment to see if I could extend the longevity of a picked grape on the kitchen counter on and off the tachyon disc, but I didn't realize that I didn't control for a very important variable, which was the surface. I had one on the countertop and one on the laminated disc, and the one on the countertop dehydrated faster. Now I know that was because the surface absorbed the moisture from it, and on the laminate disc, it was able to hold its moisture longer. So that was an experiment that convinced me. And then later, as I healed my brain with proper supplementation, I learned that that was not a proper experiment. I do think placebo is powerful, and that was probably the biggest benefit that I acquired from that tachyon technology. And then the next thing after that I got into was the work of Patrick Flannigan. And I've talked about this several times at the end of recent podcasts, so I'm not going to expand on it too much, but it's the Neurophone NF3, which I still have the same device to this day. They last forever. And it's the ultrasonic brain device that runs off of a 9-volt battery that's harmonics of 40 kilohertz of pink noise. And I've definitely felt to this day a very strong EMF mitigation effect from that device. And actually, on my recent trip down to San Diego, California for my mother's birthday, I ended up wearing that all night long when I slept at the Airbnb. And there was, I think, 15 to 20 Wi-Fi signals around me. And I definitely felt more rested in the morning because ultrasound, and Gerald Pollack talks about this in his book, The Fourth Phase of Water, ultrasound actually creates exclusion zone water, which is the gel-like water around our cells that holds a negative charge. And so that really helps to protect the neurons of the brain from the assault of EMFs, and they get really hammered by a constant Wi-Fi signal, especially while you're trying to sleep and regenerate. So I found that pretty early, and I feel like that was a huge win because that is a really effective technology, not only for EMF protection, that's almost like an off-label use. It's primarily for speed learning, increasing IQ, synchronizing the brain hemispheres. I used it to reprogram my subconscious mind for money beliefs because after watching zeitgeist and these certain documentaries, I started hating the monetary system. And then I started becoming very broke and making way less money and just kind of living a slavery lifestyle. And it wasn't until I stopped hating money that I came up with creative solutions to be of service to the world and to get rewarded for it financially. And that's where I'm at today. And I thank the Neurophone largely for achieving that. And during this time, I was still a raw foodist. So raw living foods, the whole philosophy is that you're ingesting more light, more biophotons, and we're beings of light. And when you eat cooked, or they call it dead food, which I don't subscribe to this anymore, then it steals your light, and you want to maximize the amount of light that we're ingesting so that you could strengthen your aura and your biofield, your morphogenetic field, basically become super vital. And there's some truth to those ideas, but I feel like it's taken way too far. Cooked food is very satiating, and a lot of the time cooked food is more nutritious than raw food. So I was combining all of those things together, ingesting more light, using ultrasound into my forehead, grounding rod to earth. And then I was playing with subtle energies, including pyramid energy. So at one point I used the Nick Edwards grid, which you can't find anywhere online to purchase anymore. It was a 9 pyramid grid, like 3 rows above the bed, with a giant pyramid connecting all of them above that grid. And all the points were down towards your body. And that was supposed to essentially do everything: enhance longevity, enhance dreaming, regeneration, protect from chaotic fields in the environment. I never conducted any hardcore experiments with pyramid energy, whether meditating in it or sleeping under them. But I do strongly feel that shapes have power, and that's why symbolism is so prominent in the world today. And I definitely had enhanced dreams sleeping under those pyramids. So when things really started to take off, I would say it was around 2012 when I was really heavy into shilajit and magnesium. And shilajit is something that I discovered in 2010 in powdered form. So I was adding that to my raw chocolate, and I was mixing in all these different herbs, ashwagandha, mucuna, and using shilajit to potentiate that chocolate. I also grew tobacco at home and made a concoction on the kitchen stove and mixed in honey, chocolate, and shilajit. And nicotine can be deadly orally, so you have to be really careful. But I guess I did it right because I gave it to some friends, and they had really transcendental, incredible experiences taking that tobacco extract that I made. And maybe it's because I grew those in a large pyramid that could have affected the potency. But it was really the consistency of taking shilajit and magnesium together every single day where I feel like my health really started to transform. And at the same time, I was adding in raw goat milk, which I demonized dairy as raw vegans do. And it was only 3 to 4 years into my raw vegan experiment that I was inspired by ex-vegan YouTubers to introduce things like grass-fed beef, bison, and raw dairy into my life. And it totally transformed everything. I lost some friends, some vegan friends that stopped talking to me when I did that, but those were not real friends if it was based off of my dietary choices. To this day, I still feel that those 2 supplements, shilajit and magnesium, which I really popularized because everybody's focused on fish oil, CoQ10, zinc, vitamin D, whatever it is. I think if there's only one supplement that a person would take, it would be shilajit to get the most bang for their buck. And it's not just the fulvic and humic acids in there. It's not just the detoxifying effect of shilajit and increasing iron bioavailability and oxygen utilization. It's actually the minerals in shilajit, and that's often not talked about. It's a complete mineral source. And we've been so deficient, not only from deficient soils, which is highlighted, that's only a small part of the story. The bigger part of the story is that heavy metals antagonize beneficial minerals. So with mercury toxicity, cadmium, lead, arsenic, these are not just a small percentage of the population. Everybody has heavy metal toxicity from various different sources. It's coming in from everywhere: the food, the air, the water, and that will cause nutritional deficiencies. And enzymes require minerals to work. I've heard people say that enzymes are the spark plugs of life. No, minerals are the spark plugs of life. And if you're on a raw vegan diet, you will be severely mineral deficient. And I know this from experience because after coming off of strict raw veganism, I was taking shilajit just consistently every day, taking magnesium consistently every day, mostly in the form of magnesium bicarbonate, which is a liquid form magnesium. I was taking shots of that on an empty stomach. And I was also driving to collect 4 or 5 gallons at a time of raw goat milk from local farms and bringing that to my college, and my grades shot through the roof with a combination of just those 3 things. It literally felt like a light bulb turning on in my head. And that's what happens with nutritional deficiencies. And they're very common. It's not just a third world country problem. So I mentioned magnesium, I mentioned shilajit, and ones that I've found over the last 4 years. The first one I got into back around 2019 was vitamin E, which I learned about through researching the harms of excessive polyunsaturated fatty acid intake, even the omega-3 fatty acids, and also researching lipofuscin, which is a mix of damaged proteins, damaged unsaturated fats, some metals like iron and copper, aluminum, and that inhibits autophagy in the cells. It actually fills up, to be specific, the lysosome of the cell. And a way to think about this that I thought about the last few days that makes it easier to describe is taking out your trash. So I just took out my kitchen trash today, and I have a spot where I carry the trash bag downstairs and I put it outside so that it doesn't attract bugs. It's been getting down to the low 30s here at night. And so it kind of freezes the leftover food and different things in there until I could take it to the trash dump, because I live so deep in the woods that there's no trash pickup where I live. Now, think of the trash dump as the lysosome of the cell. It's where you take your garbage. If there's nowhere to take your garbage, what would happen? Well, it would back up in your house, right? And your house would start to be filled with trash. And that would hinder your ability to operate effectively in your home. You wouldn't be able to be as organized and as effective with your work because this trash is just piling up inside. And that's exactly what happens with lipofuscin. And when that happens, your cells cannot heal because they need to take out their metabolic waste products and able to regenerate themselves. So it's a major inhibitor of healthy cellular function and thus healthy tissue function, whether it's an organ or a gland or whatever tissue it is. So as it turns out that deficiencies of vitamin E actually increase the accumulation of lipofuscin. And the inverse is true. Supplemental vitamin E, sufficient vitamin E, actually reduces lipofuscin accumulation. And there's this process called lipid peroxidation, which is actually increased in the presence of electromagnetic fields. And that is where there's a peroxidation of unsaturated fats, because those unsaturated fats are in our cell membrane, they're in our mitochondrial membranes. And when they're influenced by EMFs, they will actually oxidize and create free radicals. But if there is sufficient vitamin E because you're supplementing it consistently, then you are partly protected. To have the full protection, that's where the other nutrients come in, because nothing works in isolation. So when you dig into the clinical literature, you'll find that vitamin C, which is also known as ascorbic acid, vitamin C actually regenerates vitamin E once vitamin E donates an electron, because that's what antioxidants do. They are electron donors, and in doing so, they squash free radical inflammation. So when you're supplementing vitamin C on a consistent basis, and I'm not talking about megadoses, just taking it consistently, you are supporting the water-soluble parts of your cell. And when you supplement vitamin E consistently, you're supporting the fat-soluble parts of your cell. But as I mentioned, vitamin C will revive vitamin E. So you don't want to be supplementing vitamin E and be vitamin C deficient, because you're only going to get half of the effect. The vitamin E is going to be a lot more effective if it can be reused. So when you start looking into the research on EMFs, you'll find that vitamin E actually protects the DNA from damage caused by EMFs. Vitamin E protects the neurons. It protects the immune system, neuroprotective effects. And then you look up vitamin C and EMFs, and you'll find that vitamin C also protects the DNA from damage, and it works together with vitamin E. And these nutrients actually protect from tobacco smoke or any kind of carcinogen exposure, including air pollution in the city from, say, car exhaust. Vitamin C and vitamin E are more effective together than on their own. And when we're looking at any of these things, air pollution, EMFs, carcinogen influence, it's all oxidative stress. But the type of free radicals, that's what differs between the assault. And the big problem with EMFs, they create some pretty potent free radicals. One called the superoxide radical, and another one called peroxynitrite. And EMFs can actually increase nitric oxide production, which is often sold as a supplement or lozenges you can take to increase nitric oxide, or a lot of health influencers produce beetroot powder and different nitric oxide precursors. L-citrulline amino acid is one. And the problem with that, if someone's supplementing and intentionally trying to boost their nitric oxide production, say in an apartment complex, nitric oxide is a precursor to peroxynitrite, which is a very damaging free radical. Circling back to vitamin E as a solution, vitamin E will actually scavenge excess nitric oxide and even reactive nitrogen species. So vitamin E is just a superstar. And the reason why I'm talking about all of this is because I've had my finger on the pulse of the natural health community since around 2010. And what I've seen to this day, a very heavy emphasis on omega-3s. and making sure that your omega-3 index is perfect and supplementing fish oil. Now, I'm a huge fan of cod liver oil. I feel great from it, especially living in a really cold climate here in the north. It's antifreeze for me. That is the biggest benefit of omega-3 fatty acids to me at this point. But there's also other stuff in the Rosita brand, specifically cod liver oil, that I'm sure contributes to the effect. And the vitamin A in there is just phenomenal for so many different things, working together with vitamin D to support the immune system. But I'm not taking 30, 40, 50 grams of it every day. That's been recommended many times over the years by health influencers. And they say as long as it's not rancid, it's super good for you. I just differentiate fish liver oil versus fish oil. They're two very different things. So humans have been consuming it for a very long time. The Vikings used it as a staple, especially in the cold winter months. It's a whole food supplement, and I'm just tired of seeing all of the fear, if not about vitamin A toxicity, about the polyunsaturated fatty acids in it. Funny enough, vitamin E is the answer. It is the antidote to excess vitamin A and excess polyunsaturated fatty acids. I jumped ahead a little bit, so I'm going to now backtrack because I talked about shilajit, magnesium, raw goat milk, and it was right at that time that I was getting into something called quantum health, which is now super trendy, super popular. There are a lot of people in the health space that have built their business off of this information. And I got into that back in 2017, 2018 was when I was really practicing it just full bore. I was naked sunbathing. I was naked sunbathing in a cold tub, grounded at noonday sun. And my sweet spot back then was 55 to 58 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what made me feel the best. I didn't feel any difference going colder. And of course, the blue light blocking glasses, artificial light is a form of EMF that harms us because it suppresses melatonin production and causes disruption in cellular signaling and a whole lot of processes that helps us to stave off cancer and other degenerative diseases. So I combined looking towards the sun when it was safe to do so first thing in the morning, just getting it in my naked eyes, and then catching as many sunsets as I could when I lived somewhere where that was possible near the beach. But what I learned through that experience was the important thing is really getting bright light in the morning. It's more about the brightness. And up here in northern Idaho, for almost half of the year, it's really not that much light in the morning, or specifically UV light. And yes, there's always red and infrared year round, and that's beneficial. But I've really embraced artificial light in a healthy way and really learned over the years what to use in combination and when to use it. And that's my current strategy. If the sun's out, of course, I'm out there with my coffee, hanging out with my cats first thing in the morning. But if it's not out, then I use other strategies at my office desk. I have a chroma light. I have the old human charger. Unfortunately, they switched to a Bluetooth setup, which was a huge downgrade. But I have the old wired setup that shines light through your ears, and I've always felt that one. Now there's all sorts of visor products out there that you can strap to your head and put blue and ideally red and infrared into your eyes at the same time. My preferred method is just using these healthy circadian light bulbs. And now there's various companies that sell them. I like one called Healthy Home Shop. I've actually been buying a ton of bulbs for my new mountain. I like those lights because they have 3 settings when you switch on and off the light switch. They have a daylight, so that's like noonday sun. It's 2700 Kelvin. And then there's a sunset 2100 Kelvin, which is like a warmer with less blue and green light. And then there's a campfire, which is my favorite at night, that has no blue light and it's lower Kelvin 1400. I know blue light blocking glasses are really popular. And if you travel often, if you don't have control over your environment, your work environment, whatever it is, then blocking artificial light with blue light blocking glasses like Raw Optics. I have a discount code Blackburn if you decide to try those out. They're much higher quality than the cheaper blue light blocking glasses on the market. But the best way, if you work from home, if you mostly have control of your environment, my favorite thing is just to use these switchable circadian bulbs all throughout the house. I did recently interview the founder of SaunaSpace, and that's another thing you could use, their glow bulb. Although it's a pricey way to do it, if you travel often, that's probably the best thing to do. Just set up that incandescent light, and hopefully you're traveling by car, not by plane, because it's a little bit of a bulky setup, but that's probably the ideal. And when you get into your room, you could take off your blue light blocking glasses and the whole room's illuminated by incandescent light instead of the harsh LEDs that are usually in fixtures. The reason why I'm going into this, when people think about EMFs, they usually go immediately to the Wi-Fi router and the 5G towers. But one of the easiest that we can control is the light around us, and the light especially that reaches our eyes. I used to be very hardcore with this. I remember walking around downtown San Diego with my friend David wearing the orange UVEX glasses, which are the most affordable blue light blockers on the market because they're like $10 or something, just cheap plastic, but they block a substantial amount of the blue wavelength of light. But I noticed that I would get tired while I'm out and about, and these were very transformative and pivotal times for me. I would stay up until 1, 2 a.m. with my friend David smoking a cigar, talking about reframing our beliefs and really just getting clear on what we want in life, and deep philosophical talks. I don't know how my brain did it that late because my brain shuts off at 10 to 11 p.m. But I noticed that I would get tired if I wore those all night long. So when we found a picnic table to sit down in Old Town San Diego and smoke a cigar and have these deep philosophical chats, I would take off the orange glasses when I wasn't getting blasted with a ton of artificial light and they were more in the distance, and I would be more alert. And that's proof that those cheap UVEX blue blockers work. But in a situation like that, or if you're in a situation like that where you're really making moves and changing up your mindset and disrupting old beliefs that aren't supporting your highest potential, then you really don't want to be falling asleep. And yes, maybe your body is taking somewhat of a beating, but I currently don't wear blue blocking glasses anymore for the most part, unless I'm at my parents' house and they have really harsh overhead lighting in their home, or if I'm just exposed to a lot of artificial light on an ongoing basis, like a health conference, for example. I noticed that the health conferences definitely hammer my immune system, and it has been a failed experiment over the last several years, not wearing yellow tinted glasses while walking the floor for 2 to 3 days at a conference. My immune system takes a massive beating, and I usually start to come down with something. That's the best application for me. If you're at an event, definitely, they don't have to be orange or red tinted glasses, but definitely yellow tinted while you're walking around, even during the day, because those are really wreaking havoc on your system and causing a lot of inflammation. Even if you're supplementing vitamin C and E, like I was taking vitamin C throughout the day. But from my experience, if it's just small hits and infrequent hits, then I don't worry about blocking blue light, even when I'm driving at night. I've mentioned magnesium that protects from calcium entering into the cells. That's one of the harmful effects of EMFs as they open up these voltage gated calcium channels. This is the work of Martin Paul. So published research on this that you can look into. And calcium floods into the cell, and that stresses the cell. And he found that calcium channel blockers protect from that effect. And magnesium is a natural calcium channel blocker because magnesium antagonizes calcium. So if you have sufficient magnesium, you're not going to have calcium flooding into your cells as much where it shouldn't be. Calcium should be outside the cell. So I've talked about C and E, I've talked about magnesium. Another nutrient is melatonin, which really came on my radar the last couple of years. And this is a supplement that's been heavily demonized, especially by the quantum health crowd. They'll say all sorts of things that aren't backed up by science, that it harms the body and it shuts down your own production. It actually doesn't shut down your body's endogenous production. I interviewed Russell Ryder, which is the world expert on melatonin, and he broke down that myth and also talked about just the benefits in general of melatonin supplementation. He was really conservative with the dosage. And then you have Doris Lowe that have published papers with him, and she uses very high doses with people in her group into the gram and several grams range. So 5 to 10 grams a day, which is almost impossible to do in capsule form. So her group tends to do powdered melatonin, which I've tried. It just tastes horrible. I can't get through it. And so I just prefer the capsule form. I'm somewhere in between Russell Ryder and Doris Lowe. So I take 200 milligrams every night. That's what makes me feel the best. I feel like it's a cumulative effect. The more consistent I am with it, the better I'm feeling. It's upgrading my whole system. That's the effect that I feel from it. My sleep's getting better and better. I track it with the Oura Ring. Actually just hit a new record last night in REM sleep length, 2 hours and 40 minutes. And one of the things that Doris Lowe has shined light on is that melatonin is protective against ELF, extreme low frequency, EMF. And she's talked a lot about how both vitamin C as ascorbic acid and melatonin are both redox molecules. So they participate in redox reactions by either donating or accepting electrons. And that whole redox system is what gets challenged in the presence of EMFs. Melatonin is often just thought of as a sleep hormone, but it's much more accurate to think of it as a redox molecule, an antioxidant, a master antioxidant. It can actually detoxify multiple molecules at once instead of just neutralizing one at a time. It's also a heavy metal chelator. It'll bind to heavy metals. And melatonin actually activates our endogenous antioxidants, glutathione peroxidase, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. And you can buy these supplements and take them directly. And sometimes that's great, but I think it's more of an addition than a primary strategy. Over the years, I've seen liposomal glutathione be very popular that you could buy as a paste in syringes. I never felt anything from those products, any encapsulated or syringe style glutathione product. And I found one from Oro Wellness called Glutaril. And I interviewed Dr. Nayan Patel, the founder, on this podcast. And that this was after taking it for several weeks or a few months. And I took the Glutaril Plus, which is a transdermal application. I spray it on my abdomen. And that's one that I actually feel immediately. And especially if I'm consistent with it, more energy, faster recovery from exercise, just overall feel better. But to me, this is an additional product with the foundational stuff. And there's financials to consider. All of these things cost money. Nutritional supplements cost money. And one of my major goals with sharing health information is to offer the most affordable solutions and then go up from there. And depending on the condition of the person, the intensity of the environment, that will determine, or the goals of the person, longevity goals, that will determine how much you stack. Another honorable mention would be Methylene Blue, which also has redox properties. It donates electrons to the electron transport chain, helps with the creation of ATP, granted that there's enough magnesium to make ATP. Both the glutathione product and the Transcriptions Methylene Blue, they're just blue product, I travel with wherever I go, and I just feel better having those on hand in addition to all of the Mitolife supplements, but specifically the vitamin C with polyphenols, the PUFA Protect, the mixed tocopherol vitamin E, my Mag ATP product, the magnesium, and the high dose 50 milligram melatonin capsules. Getting back to foundationals, a really foundational thing is zinc. And this is a supplement that I used to demonize, and looking into the zinc finger system, thanks to Robert Seelig, interviewing Robert Seelig, listening to his work with mineral balancing and using zinc with his clients. It's a really fascinating area of research. And then especially getting into zinc and EMFs. So zinc supplementation actually reduces lipid peroxidation in the brain after exposure to low frequency EMFs. Zinc also protects from the oxidative stress caused by EMFs by increasing superoxide dismutase while decreasing lipid peroxidation. And it also protects against apoptosis that's induced by EMFs. So that's cell death. Zinc is actually a structural component of the actual antioxidant enzymes that protect us against EMFs. So we're really going to the root. I was mostly plant-based the first 30 years of my life. I didn't like red meat, and supplementing zinc, especially the last just 2 years even, I've noticed a lot better cognition, more stable mood, energy, better sleep. I mean, zinc affects so many aspects of our health. But when I learned that zinc protects against electromagnetic radiation and all of the different ways that I mentioned, and probably more that we're unaware of, then I was even more excited to supplement it. So I take minimum 30 milligrams of zinc a day. I've pulsed up to 60 milligrams a day. And it's just something to go by how you feel. Also, you could use HTMA or the OligoScan or both to track your results. But remember, as I said in the beginning of the show, heavy metal exposure will fight with your beneficial minerals. They'll antagonize your zinc, specifically cadmium, arsenic, and lead. So by supplementing zinc, you could actually start to eliminate these metals. And I would recommend combining it with a binder, such as the Zeolite Labs, the ZeoCharge product. I take that every single day, and I'm still on 30 grams of it, which is a large dose, but that's a really powerful and safe binder. And I guess I would add that to the honorable mentions list. Not liquid zeolite, not nano zeolite, but clean, powdered clinoptilolite. And that's from the company Zeolite Labs. It's the ZeoCharge product that I've talked about quite a bit, because metals attract EMFs. So if you bind the metals and excrete them out of your body, it makes sense that you're going to be less of an antenna. So I would add that to the list of the blue stuff. I don't know if they're still censoring it. And the glutathione. Those are three major honorable mentions that I would add on top of the Mitolife supplements. In addition to Martin Pall that I've talked about on the show, another great researcher is named Magda Havis. She's a professor at Trent University in Canada, and she's been researching the biological effects, both beneficial and harmful, of not ionizing electromagnetic frequency. She has over 200 publications. And if you want to dive into the literature on EMFs, just search her name and a lot of great stuff will come up. She connects so many dots. For example, how type 1 diabetics require less insulin and type 2 diabetics have lower blood sugar in an electromagnetically clean environment. And she addresses this term called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. So people that are more sensitive to EMFs. I posed the question, should we conduct more studies looking at vitamin C and E and magnesium deficiency and see how those contribute to electromagnetic hypersensitivity? So to continue on with solutions and my EMF journey, I discovered the Blushield technology while I was at a health conference, and someone named Brian Miller handed me the mobile unit. I held it in my hand. I was feeling stressed. I was in a really negative, controlling business partnership, and I was getting blasted with artificial light, and it was just toxicity everywhere around me. And it felt like an immediate calm washed over me. So I immediately ordered a mobile and a home unit. I got home to my cabin in Big Bear that I was renting at the time, tiny 700 square feet cabin. I plugged in their cube and I felt like I was getting sick for the next few days. And then it went away and I felt better than I did before. I was not expecting that strong of a response to something that looked to be just a subtle energy device. It was a very tangible feeling. So I started promoting them and sharing them with people that were following my journey. And to this day, I still carry their mobile unit in my pocket. Now, for those that have never heard of it, it's basically a scalar emitter device. It was invented in New Zealand, and my friend Brandon Amalani is the US distributor. Listen to the show that I did with him on Blushield, to search on YouTube, Blushield, Mitolife Radio. But essentially, it's not blocking EMFs. It's not even harmonizing. What it's doing is emitting a field. In the case of the mobile unit, it's roughly, I think it's 8 to 10 feet or something like that. A scalar field that the body and any other body around you, like surrounding people, also get the benefit. It's a more harmonious, energetic signature to tune into than the chaotic 60 hertz or Wi-Fi signal that's just like a slow drip, I think is an analogy that Brandon used, and it just stresses the cells, stresses the body, and it's not variable like the Blushield. I think Brandon's used the analogy that it's similar to walking in the forest. We're getting just endless harmonics, hard to quantify amount of harmonic energies that the body prefers than this just unnatural kind of constant monotone energy that we get from artificial man-made sources. And I love my technology. I love the Blushield. I also have all of the Somavedics plugged in, which is much more of a subtle energy in my opinion, but that's using piezoelectricity with crushed different crystals, and it's running electricity through it. I would put that second to the Blushield in order of importance. And when we get into technologies, I noticed that a lot of companies, and I don't blame them for doing this, they say that their technology is the most important for EMF protection. And even silver embedded clothing, I got into that for a while wearing silver embedded underwear 24/7, wearing silver jackets when I went to the airport and got on an airplane, even silver embedded pants. And after talking to my friend Brian Hoyer up here in Idaho, I learned that that's not ideal, especially when the conductive silver fabric is touching the skin, because you're actually creating harmonics that are unknown with unknown, potentially harmful effects. And this differs from the grounding sheet that I mentioned earlier, because you're just in one spot. You're not walking through different Wi-Fi bubbles and different EMF fields. You're just in your bedroom, and you have a lot more control over that environment as well. Versus with the clothing, there's just a lot of unknowns. And the reason why I jumped into the clothing from the Blushield and the Somavedic is just to make the point that every company tends to see, and this is a pattern, they tend to say our technology is the most important and all the other stuff is great, but make sure that you're using our technology or clothing or whatever it is first before anything else. And where I would kind of push back is to say that we are scalar emitters. And I've had Dr. Jer on the show, the inventor of the Rasha, and that's a scalar emitter. And he said the human body is the most powerful scalar, well, not emitter, a more accurate term is accessor. So we access the scalar field through our body. And the healthier we are, the more we fill nutrient deficiencies, vitamin and mineral deficiencies, the stronger we're able to tap in to that field and access it. So that's really where I'm coming from. The foundational stuff is always nutritional. It's vitamin C, vitamin E, magnesium, melatonin. And then if you want to get into zinc, there's even selenium and iodine. There's all of these nutrients, but the big four, in my opinion, vitamin C, vitamin E, magnesium, and melatonin. And if you could handle a 5 list, it would be zinc added to that. That would be the big 5 to focus on. And then after that, you can get into potentially the pink noise, ultrasonic neurophone device, the NF3, and Blushield, and Somavedic, and all of these other technologies that are out there. But to me, the foundation is really nutritional supplements. And even if I didn't own Mitolife, I would still be sharing that message. And in that list of 5, I didn't mention shilajit because to me, that's just beyond foundational. That is the ultimate foundation that I've been on for almost 14 years. And so shilajit is just a given. And then you would add that list of 5 on top of it. So continuing with my story, I moved several times, moved back and forth over the last 5 or 6 years from the forest into an urban environment, more population dense city, and then back into a forest cabin. And I just keep being drawn back to the forest. I think that is the ultimate, if you're able to do it, is to live in a rural area surrounded by a lot of birch and pine trees and cedar trees. Around my house, there's giant trees. There's a lot of research using house plants next to a Wi-Fi router, and the plant dies. And so it's reasonable to assume that plants, and especially huge trees, are giant grounds. And they do absolutely work with electricity, with the fungi in the soil, the microbes in the soil. There's an electric process going on there, and grounding plants has been found to be beneficial and enhance plant growth. If plants are insulated from the earth, they actually grow better if you hammer a ground rod, just like with the Mitolife sheet, and put it into your potted plant. It will be a lot healthier. And there's also stuff going on in the canopy of the trees as well, altering the electromagnetic environment. And it's just something that you feel. You know, I could throw all this research at you and different studies, but we know that when you're camping when you're around a lot of trees, when you're in a national forest, you feel calmer, you feel more energized, you just feel better. I know it's not practical for a lot of people, especially if they have a family, to just uproot from the city and move into the wilderness. And that's really where a lot of this mitigation comes into play. And I use all of this mitigation when I travel for my family's birthdays or holidays. I will utilize everything that I'm sharing with you all at once because we're just getting hammered. There's bioweapons going on that they're releasing into the public. There's stuff being sprayed on us. I mean, we're just getting hammered from every angle. And this is one of my foundational philosophies why supplementation is absolutely necessary. We can't fight that with whole food. There's just so much against us, and it's not something to be afraid of or be stressed about. It's just something to be aware of, and ideally get to this place where you're integrating all of these things that I'm talking about in a way that doesn't stress you out. It's just second nature. It's just part of your lifestyle, and you just do as much as you can without getting overwhelmed. And my personal experience has been over the last 14 years, the more I integrate, actually, the higher capacity I have for stress, the less I get overwhelmed. This year has just been everything thrown at me all at once. And yet I haven't gotten sick, or if I do, it's for a day and then I bounce back super quick. I just feel very resilient, and I credit proper nutritional supplementation to that largely. And one thing that I forgot to mention, talk about easy to implement, dirty electricity filters. So years ago, I interviewed Dave Stetzer, who found that dairy cows had less milk production being under power lines. That was a really good interview. If you missed it, just search Dave Stetzer, Mitolife Radio. There's a lot of gems back in the archives on YouTube that you can find from the last 3 or 4 years. And then there's a company, Greenwave. I also interviewed Kim Lear on my show, another great dirty electricity episode. So what is dirty electricity? It's also called electromagnetic interference, EMI, or line noise. In the podcast that I did with Dave, he said a big source is when devices that are plugged in are switching from AC to DC, and that generates a high voltage transient that actually goes out into the room. And dirty electricity is implicated in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, even suicide, and different mental and emotional issues. And these filters that you plug into your outlets are only around $30. And if you own your home, then you could put one right next to the breaker box, which is ideal. Not a $30 device, but a bigger one, like my friend Brian at Shielded Healing. He has those on his website, and you could do like a whole home dirty electricity filter. There's something called the Power Perfect box, and that's an option. Or if you travel a lot or you don't have a lot of money to spend, then you could just get these $30 filters and plug them in where you spend most of your time. And that tends to be the bedroom, maybe the living room, or the kitchen. Whenever I stay in an Airbnb or especially a hotel, I'll plug them in. I'll bring maybe 10 of them and just plug them into pretty much every outlet. And you could actually measure it. So you can buy a measuring device. I think those tend to be a little over $100. And you could see the drop when you plug in these filters. That's one of the top things you could do to reduce EMFs in your own environment, especially if you have neighbors close by and they have a lot of things plugged in. It's really crucial that you plug these into your home, especially in the bedroom where you're sleeping for 7, 8, 9 hours a day. Dirty electricity can actually alter the pH of our saliva. So you stack that with how rampant vitamin K2 deficiency is, which regulates the pH of our saliva, vitamin K2 deficiency plus dirty electricity exposure 24/7. And no wonder why diabetes is such an epidemic. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but that's a big part of it. Digestion starts in the mouth. So if just the saliva is off, that kickstarts the process of suboptimal digestion. And then you have all of these gut disorders and blood sugar dysregulation that follows. I often get asked, Matt, what do you recommend for type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes or whatever health condition? There's never just one thing. Like, there are important things that are often underappreciated, like the power of vitamin E, the power of vitamin K2, the power of vitamin C, and not mega doses of it, low, small, consistent doses of it. Those things are really overlooked, but it's never just one thing that contributes to any pathological disease process. If something's chronic, there's a list of things that have been off for probably many years, potentially decades. And some of it's nutritional, some of it's EMF. Oftentimes, one of the biggest contributing factors is staying in a relationship or an environment that you should have walked away from a long time ago. And it's all intimately intertwined and tied together. So nothing's separate from each other. And I think people often are looking for a solution through an Instagram private message or whatever social media outlet post. And that's not how it works. You have to get a piece of the puzzle here or there. That's my goal with what I share here on the podcast and on social media, to give people tools that they can integrate into what they've already experienced and what they know that works for them, and maybe find some really critical missing pieces that can help to restore balance to their life. And there are things that do help with EMFs, like the Theraphi device. I interviewed Brandon Amalani about that. That's theraphiofficial.com. That is a really powerful scalar device. And some people call it the med bed, if you're familiar with the QAnon people. And on the website, it says Theraphi supports proper charge and charge distribution at the cellular level. So you're actually getting bathed in scalar energy that's emitted from these plasma tubes, that 250,000 volts plus, high voltage, low amperage running through these noble gases in these tubes. And you lay on a massage table. I have this in my office, and it is a human charger, but it's pricey. It's like the price of a used car. And whether it's that device or the ARC PEMF, another device that Brandon sells, arcpemf.com, that's the best one on the market. Similar price to the Theraphi. And then there's things like hyperbaric oxygen chambers, and there's the Rasha device, which I'm starting to play around with again. But then we start getting into more clinical grade, like you go to a retreat or a health biohacking spa or whatever it is, and you use these fairly expensive devices. So that's why I mentioned these near the end of the show, because most people are not going to be able to afford these or want these in their home unless you are making it part of your business. And in that case, I know the best devices for your clinic. I see a lot of these little health centers around, and I'm really disappointed with the quality of technology and basically their lack of discernment on high quality health technology. I've literally seen people say that red light beds give you vitamin D and promote vitamin D synthesis. So that's kind of where we're at right now, and it's very unfortunate. Maybe I'll start offering, consulting for a fee to these clinics, because it's really wild what's going on out there. So with that, let's jump into some Q&A questions. I'm going to try to keep it rapid fire. John asks, what are your final thoughts on EMF blocking clothing in normal daily settings? Well, I already touched on that, but I will add this. If you're not bald and you have hair and it's a silver baseball cap where it's not necessarily conducting into your bald head, that would be, no judgment by the way, that would be fine from what I understand. Or if there's silver blocking clothing, and as far as I know, there's none on the market right now that have this, where the silver does not touch your skin, there could be a benefit there. But I just don't worry about it anymore because you have to wash them separately from your regular clothes. And that Blushield detergent that I use for the Mitolife grounding sheets, it can get pricey if you're using a lot of it. So I only save that for the grounding sheet, and I just don't wear silver embedded clothing anymore. A listener asks, children sleeping near the Wi-Fi router at night. It's out of my hands to control it. What do you recommend? I would just give them proper supplementation. The conventional advice out there is to not give melatonin to children under the age of 3, but you never know with the system out there. I haven't personally looked into that too deeply, but even if you had them on magnesium, vitamin E, vitamin C, even zinc, these things are very protective, and they don't have to swallow capsules. You can actually break open those capsules into their smoothie or different foods, and they could take it that way. I would look into getting a Blushield device, maybe the Cube, but whatever's in your budget, and plugging that in near the sleeping area and see if there's an improvement in mood, energy, sleep, just overall health. Listener Brittany asks, how to recover from traveling on planes. It feels like vitamin C is not enough for me. So I would ask, are you taking melatonin before you go to bed? Which, as I said, it has a building effect. It's used by the mitochondria, and the mitochondria, if they're strong and working effectively, that is your scalar generator. That's your Faraday cage. That is the ultimate thing to focus on, is mitochondrial health. There's also vitamin E, which I mentioned earlier, that's often missing with the whole vitamin C message. It really blows my mind reading all of these orthomolecular books of these doctors that were using high dose vitamin C for so many different health conditions, and never a mention of vitamin E in any of the vitamin C books that I've read. It's really mind-boggling because they work together perfectly. You might want to get an oligo scan. That's my favorite test. It's the spectrophotometry test. A practitioner would shine light into 4 points on your non-dominant hand, and every test that I scan myself, I'm consistently low in magnesium. And again, it's been a really stressful year for me, but even with supplementing magnesium, my burn rate is very high. So magnesium bicarbonate shots on an empty stomach, that's the most affordable way to supplement magnesium. Magnesium pills, I like the glycine and taurine forms, but take whatever form works for you. I have a Mag ATP product that a lot of people like. And magnesium baths at least once or twice a week, and not just a measly cup or two that's not going to do anything, but dump in a whole bag of the ancient minerals, the 8-pounder magnesium chloride. That's how you take a magnesium bath, and do that minimum once a week. And if I'm not consistent with that, I do personally 16 pounds because I have a huge lodestone magnetic bathtub. Again, getting into expensive, not practical solutions. And then I'm even moving into an underground bunker, which is the next level of grounding next year, but that's unattainable for most people. So keeping it practical, recovering from traveling on planes. You could also look at methylene blue as well and cycle that in between vitamin C. And I would also make sure that you're grounding. If you're recovering from traveling on planes in your home, make sure you're grounded, rod to earth. To me, whenever I fly back from Southern California, that place is just super rough on my system. I really don't feel good there, and I'm in and out. As soon as I get home and sleep on that grounding sheet, it feels like an instant reset on my system every time. Well, a listener brought up electric vehicles, and this is a topic that I'm very passionate about because I've looked heavily into it over the last 3 years, and it's something that's very demonized. It becomes so political. People associate EVs with liberalism and greenwashing and climate change and whatever they connect to it. When in fact, if you have solar panels and an electric vehicle, whether it's an electric UTV, an electric snowmobile, an electric car, you have sovereignty. You're able to fuel at home. And then people come at me, oh, Matt, what about a EMP from Russia or China? That would make everything obsolete. Or what if the Tesla activates and drives you to the gulag or the concentration camps and all these scenarios? What's a more likely scenario? Well, what happened here a month ago, there was a massive storm that took out 85% of the power in my area. And I drove past a gas station I've lived near for the last 4 years, and it was completely dark and out of gas, and people were unable to fill up. And looking at the hurricane in Florida, the 2 hurricanes that just happened down there, wild situation with fights breaking out, gas stations being down for weeks. And some people with rooftop solar and a Tesla car or some type of EV and the ability to use solar power to run their pump to pump water out of their basement, they were completely fine. And I've heard story after story of that. And so, it's just become so emotionally charged that I like to take emotion out of things, because then the prefrontal cortex can function, logic can work. You could actually use something called critical thinking instead of getting emotional and getting lost in your amygdala. So, long intro to this question. Listener asks, if buying an EV and charging at home, what are some tips to mitigate the increased EMF burden? So whether it's an EV charger or a smart meter, although they're different animals, I'll just start with the smart meter because I didn't touch on this in the show. I recently purchased 100 acres, and the electrician put the smart meter right on the guest cabin. It's a little tiny guest cabin, but they also put it the only spot where the bedroom could be. And that's the worst possible situation, is you're 6 feet from the smart meter. And I probably should have started the show with this, but EMF, it's a catch-all term for different fields. So you have electric fields, you have magnetic fields. In the case of smart meters, you have radio frequency or RF fields. You have dirty electricity. You have many different types. And I think it's important to distinguish between them, because you can't just say the smart meter emits EMF. You have to be specific with what you're talking about. Are you worried about the RF? Because that's going to take a different solution. Are you worried about the magnetic field? You need a massive shield that isn't practical to block the big magnetic field created by the smart meter. But the RF, the radio frequency field, that's what the electric company uses to remotely check your power usage so they can charge you the bill. And you want that off the house, ideally on a pole just off the wall of the house. And that's what I'm doing with the smart meter on my guest cabin. And same thing with an electric vehicle charger. If you can't have it off the house, then you just want it away from the bedroom. And most of them are in the garage. And if your garage is on the other side of the house, that's awesome. And even if it's right next to the bedroom, the charger is not like a smart meter. It doesn't create a giant field. And if you have dirty electricity filters plugged in, especially where the power is like the main line, main power is coming into the house by the breaker box, that solves a big part of the problem. This is a great question. Please elaborate on the difference between over the ear and in ear wireless headphones. So with RF EMF exposure, there's something called the inverse square law. And that simply means that the intensity of the field is decreased the further you go from it. So if you double the distance from the source, then the intensity decreases by 4x. So think of the in-ear Apple AirPods versus the like AirPods Max. It's not in your ear, it's outside of your ear, the transmitter. So it's a lot further away from your brain. And I'm not one of these people that says never put AirPods in your ear. If you're on a short phone call, I use them sometimes at the airport. But whenever I can, I use the AirPod Max. I like those, the over-the-ear headset. Just feels a lot more comfortable. I don't like things inside my ear for long periods of time. But if it's just for a short time, I don't think there's anything wrong with the AirPods. It's just obviously sleeping in them, wearing them for several hours a day, especially not having good tissue ascorbate levels. So vitamin C deficiency in your tissues is low, vitamin E in the tissues is low, you're magnesium deficient, you're melatonin and zinc deficient, then the negative effects will be compounded. But if somebody's supplementing all of those, then possibly wearing them all day would not have a negative impact. I truly believe in the power of all of those supplements. There's a question, mold and EMFs. As far as I know, EMFs increase the proliferation of mold. So the best thing to do is to move. And one of the best solutions I've found for mold illness recently is Zeolite and the Zeolite Labs ZeoCharge product. Jeff's had a lot of success with people with mold illness doing a Zeolite powder protocol, the high dose protocol that he talks about, and seeing a complete recovery. Another question, thoughts on grounding pads while working on a computer. I did that for many years, and then Ryan Hoyer informed me that grounding pads pick up electric fields and the proximity of the computer and the power strip and everything going on. Probably not a good idea. I just focus on grounding while I sleep. And I think that's the most important time to ground. And it's the easiest time to ground because you're just laying there for 8 hours. Listener asks, do you have an opinion on the Leela quantum upgrade services? So where they beam your coordinates, your property or your land with quantum energy. About 3 to 4 years ago, I played around with their quantum blocks and cubes, and it's a really esoteric brand. Didn't notice anything at all with any of their products. And then recently I interviewed Matt Kaufman, I think it was earlier this year, an HTMA practitioner. And after the show, we ended up talking for well over an hour on different health technologies and things that we're playing with. And he convinced me to try the quantum upgrade subscription from that company. And I'll try anything once generally in the health field, as long as it's not too crazy. And I turned it on and I had some weird experiences going on in my home. My electric shaver in my bathroom turned on its own. The cats didn't turn it on. That's never, ever happened. A fire alarm turned on and then turned off. There's just a lot of strange things happening within 30 minutes of activating the service. So if you'd like to try it, reach out to me on social media. I'll send you a link. I haven't added it to my website because it's a little too esoteric, and I try to keep it really practical and grounded with my solutions. But if you're into stacking like I am, and this is really out there, it's something that you can play with. Another question, curious about the fears around 5G towers. Is there anything to that? There's a website called antennasearch.com where you can type in your address and look at both towers and antennas within a 3 mile radius, which is really the alarm bells should start going off if they're within 3 miles of your home. And if they are and you can't move, don't panic. You can integrate as many things as you can that I talked about in this show. Because I've been looking into this topic for a good 14 years, there's so much to talk about. This could probably be a several hour long show, but I'm trying to keep it succinct. Magnetico sleep pads would probably be the best solution if you can't move and you have either a power line over your bed, like I had for years, or a 5G tower across the street. A 20 Gauss strong Magnetico sleep pad would probably be the way to go. And for years, I actually merged that with the Swiss Dream Beds from CBH Wood Furniture. It's on my Matt Blackburn site. It's my favorite beds. There's no metal in them, non-toxic materials, and they can custom make you a bed where the Magnetico would fit with their sleep system. And that's ideal. A lot of people get into Faraday cage canopies. I really don't think that's as effective as sleeping on the Magnetico sleep pad. I was thriving when I was in a heavy EMF environment sleeping on that pad. Then the listener asked about cell phones as well. And my general practice with that is to keep Wi-Fi and Bluetooth off. You have to go into settings to turn it off. You can't just swipe up on the iPhone and switch them off. You have to go into settings every time to truly shut them off. And if I'm not using those, I have them off, especially Wi-Fi. As soon as I drive away from the house, first thing I do is turn off Wi-Fi on my iPhone. And then if it's in my pocket, I'll put it in airplane mode. But if I'm using it, waiting for a call or messages or whatever, then I'll just carry it around in my hand while I'm walking around a store, which is a lot better than having it in my pocket near my reproductive organs. And whenever I'm talking to somebody on the phone, 99% of the time, my phone will be in speaker mode. I don't care who hears the conversation, and I'll just hold it away from my head and communicate that way. Listener writes, anecdotal, but my legs ache with certain devices and laptops that are more powerful. That be the EMF. Yeah, it's a great idea if you use a laptop on your lap, which I don't think is an ideal place for a laptop, even though it's called a laptop. The laptop should be on a tabletop, not on your lap. If it is on your lap, or it has to be on your lap, there's a company called Defender Shield, and they make something called the Defender Pad, which is only $130, and it blocks 90 gigahertz EMF radiation and heat coming from the bottom of your laptop. That is a great investment, and I actually keep one just in case around my laptop. Another question, how have you integrated the Theraphi into your life, and what has been its impact? So I talked about that earlier. That's the plasma device. I have 2 plasma tubes. Usually there's just one on each side. I have 2 at my head and 2 at my feet while I lay on the massage table. I generally use it for 12 minutes a day. Usually after dinner, at the end of the night, I'll be using it after I record this show. It's currently 8 p.m. here, and I'll put it on a podcast. You can't have electronics near the device. It actually turns on my automatic litter box called the Casa Leo. It's the best cat litter box on the market. All the other ones, as far as I know, break pretty quickly. It'll actually turn on the Casa Leo litter box across the room when I turn on the Theraphi, and it'll just run a cycle and clean itself, which is kind of funny. But I'll play a podcast or some health lecture on YouTube while I lay there for 12 minutes. And if I'm really tired, I'll actually fall asleep and have a power nap. Its impact, well, plasma energy, whether it's from the violet ray, which I have the high quality one, the old school beeswax style violet ray from the company Bar or Bear. I don't know how you pronounce it. BAAR. It's an old school health company, and they actually sell the real violet ray for a little over $600. And if you just want to play around and dip your feet in, you can find an entry level one over at Shen Blossom. I'm not saying it's cheap. I'm not saying it doesn't work. And it was actually Brandon that told me about the expensive one. But for someone that just wants to use it for, zapping pimples, which is a great use of it, or any kind of skin condition, for $250, then even less with my Blackburn discount, that's an awesome deal for what you get for that high frequency plasma therapy. So it's hard to say what the effects because I'm doing so many things, but I do feel a difference if I don't use the Theraphi for an extended period of time. So I minimum use it, even if I'm very busy, every other day, because I do feel just not as vibrant if I'm not getting a treatment regularly. Thoughts on taking deuterium depleted water for EMF protection? I'm not aware of a connection there besides making more ATP, which happens when you have less deuterium in your body, can only be a benefit. You're probably a more powerful scalar accessor with more energy production. You have a stronger biofield. You can keep stacking so many things. As I said earlier, as long as you don't get overwhelmed, and obviously there's the financial consideration. Thoughts on heated blankets? Don't worry about it, or do you have one that you suggest? That is a topic that I have not delved into, so I don't have an opinion. I would imagine the cheap ones are emitting a lot of EMFs, and I'm sure there are ones out there that are shielded. That's something that I would be concerned about, especially if you're sleeping under it. I would definitely do your research and find one that is built properly. Another question, are EMFs connected to the rise in autism? I think they're connected to every condition. As I said earlier, they're not the only contributing factor to degenerative disease, but neurological stuff, I notice on social media, everybody is so easily triggered now. And I think that oversensitive kind of lifestyle where you're so easy to get swept into emotion, that is a sign of a dysregulated nervous system. And that is one of the primary targets of EMFs. It definitely dysregulates our nervous system. There's a question about solar panels on the roof. Do those affect people's health? So while the solar panels are harvesting photons during the day, there is a magnetic field that is generated at night when the sun is down. There's going to be really no magnetic field generated from the panels, or if there is, it's so small that the distance from them makes it not matter. And if you're stacking a lot of the things that I've been talking about in this show, I would really not worry about solar panels on your roof. And circling back to EVs, what do you think about EMFs in electric vehicles? I think the older ones, it was potentially an issue. The newer electric vehicles, not so much. When they're charging, that's really when there's a huge magnetic field that's generated. And depending on the EV, for some, they charge from the front left on the driver's side. For Tesla, it's on the back left side of the car. And ideally, you're not sleeping in that zone when it's charging, or there's not a person sitting there the whole time that it's charging, especially at the level 3 fast chargers. But I think the whole electric vehicle thing is overblown, especially if you have sufficient vitamin C, vitamin E, again, broken record, magnesium, melatonin, and zinc. There's really nothing to worry about with electric vehicles. And as I said, if you have solar panels, it is the perfect combination because you will be the only one in your area, unless there's another person with an EV, driving around when the grid goes down and you can't get gasoline or diesel anymore. Not to insinuate that there will be a place to go if it really gets bad. And I've thought about so many scenarios in my head over the last 14 plus years. But if you have acreage, at least you can drive around on your acreage, even if you don't leave your property. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I hope you guys got something good out of this. Go back and listen to my old shows on the Mitolife YouTube channel. It's Mitolife Official. I've had a lot of shows on EMFs, whether it's dirty electricity or EMFs in general. I've interviewed a lot of guests over the years, and I thought it would be helpful just to consolidate what I've learned into one solo show that you can glean tips from and hopefully improve your energy production, make life a little bit less stressful. So my website is matt-blackburn.com. A lot of the stuff I talked about is on there, especially on the front page. I mentioned the Zeolite, the bed, the deuterium depleted water, the Blushield device. One thing I didn't mention is red light therapy. I do that almost every day. And a great company out there is Gemba Red. I'm also getting into incandescent light and playing around again with UV light. I have a cool light on the way from EMR Tech. I'm going to be interviewing the founder. It's been years since I've talked to Chris, in a couple weeks, and talk about the benefits of UV supplementation and just getting sufficient red light and UV light, whether from the sun or from devices. That alone is very protective from man-made harmful EMFs. So when you click the shop tab, you can see the drop down. I have the magnesium flakes that I mentioned, the dirty electricity filters, a lot of the things on there, even the infopathy device. That's a way to kind of reset the EMFs in your water if you're traveling. Recently, I traveled for my mom's birthday down to San Diego, and I utilized civilization. I don't have Instacart way up here in the woods. A bear would have to deliver my groceries, so I used that in the city. So I saved a trip to Sprouts and got Mountain Valley water and glass delivered to my Airbnb. Best thing available. I would choose that over Icelandic in plastic. And then the infopathy can be used to actually imprint into the water beneficial substances. I do the 12 cell salts. That's my favorite program from them. It just hooks to your phone with the audio jack, and water gets hammered with EMFs. And I think that's partly why it doesn't nourish us as much. I'm not going to say hydrate, but it just doesn't feel as nourishing when you are drinking water at an airport or just traveling in general. So that little IC pad from Infopathy, the imprinting glowing pad, is one of my staples whenever I travel. And then if you're home, you can get wild with the MRET water pitcher from Shen Blossom. And there's a lot of cool things to play with water, but that's a whole rabbit hole that I didn't go down, was the connection between EMFs and our drinking water, because you could actually use it to improve the water that then becomes your blood, which is pretty awesome. My CLF protocol is up there. It's calcification, lipofuscin, and fibrosis. That's a gentle, non-invasive protocol that everybody can integrate with whatever else they're doing. And that helps to reduce the accumulation of those three things. We are having a Halloween sale. So if you go over to mitolife.co, that's my brand that I founded. It's 20% off site-wide. And that is through the weekend. So if you've been waiting to purchase a 7-stage water filter or a shower filter, grounding sheets, we have fresh roasted small batch coffee, really clean shampoo and conditioner, all sorts of different supplements, many of which I mentioned on the show. Now is a great time to stock up. So if you enjoyed the show and the information, If you want to follow me more closely, you can go to Matt Blackburn on Instagram. There's also Mitolife on Instagram. As I mentioned, the YouTube is Mitolife Official. But I'm very active on Instagram more than any other platform, even though I'm shadow banned there. So if you're intrigued by this information and you want to dive deeper into all this stuff, that is a great place to go. And I will see you guys next Friday. Stay supercharged.